Growing up in the American landscape is one way to do it. Here, we got it all. Rusted out scrap yards, equally rusted out, but significantly larger buildings, lots of roads to drive on. If you ever wanted to visit a rusted out factory or scenic mountain range, yeah, we had those too. I grew up here looking at rusted places and beautiful landscapes. I like to think of myself as pretty smart in my youth. I could feel the difference between both early on. I'm a photographer now. These rusty places, and pretty ones too, still stir something inside me. I don't know what it is, but I know that's why I'm an artist. But yeah, it's also a visual record of these places that I really, I felt fascinated by. And I aimed for a certain level of, how should you say it? Just a certain irony, a certain skepticism of an ambition where you have this cinder block mansion that was built in the Florida Keys to withstand tropical storms, and it's clearly been abandoned. So it's a certain level of ambition, I think, that's in these works where you see what Americans value and where we've kind of fallen short, or perhaps where we've succeeded.
Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you, Patrick. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast.
It's awesome. I was talking to you before we did the show, and a couple of the episodes that you watched are some of my favorites. So I'm glad you've been tuning in, and I've been looking at your work. And as soon as Steve introduced me to you, and I've been kind of, without a better term for this, a little obsessed. I love your work. I'm very much drawn to it. You remind me of some of my previous guests, but you definitely have your own way of looking at some of the subject matter that we're going to discuss today. So I'm really excited to have you on today. So thanks for coming on.
I'm glad to be here. It's always a treat, really, to talk about the work and have a conversation. So I appreciate the invitation.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. So, but before we jump into it, let's take this moment and introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
So my name is John Sanderson. I'm a fine art photographer based in New York City, where I was born, and I continue to maintain a studio in Midtown Manhattan. I still live here. I believe the influence of growing up in the city has shaped my work in several ways. In high school, I began photography. I was also introduced to large format film photography at the time when I was 16 years old. So I've been photographing with film cameras since that time. And my work is a blend of family history. It's also a reflection on the contemporary landscape. So it's in some sense, my family, my grandparents, they had a traveling show in Vaudeville where they traveled all around the country doing different acts in small towns for over 10 years, 10, 15 years. So I grew up with this idea of having this family who traveled all over the country. So I feel like I've inherited this kind of so-called burden that I like to say is a burden of inheritance, where I have this need, this primal need to go out and explore the American landscape and photograph it and find some kind of truth in there. And then, and that with that background, also then being in the city, I feel like shaped my work in several ways as well. Currently, I'm working on several major bodies of work that explore the American landscape, some of which are ongoing, and I don't feel like they're concluded yet, and other projects are published or finished. So it's I work on this photography, my photography pretty much full time. So it is my life's work. So
It's really good. I can't wait to get to it. But I have so many questions. I didn't know the vaudeville thing. What was the act? What were they? What were they doing?
It was a variety act. My grandfather was named. His name was Everett Sanderson. He was known as Sandy, the versatile Scotsman. So he had all different kind of acts. Like he would play three clarinets at once. He'd play one in the middle with his hand, and then he'd have pedals where he controlled the uh, the buttons on the two other clarinets.
Wow.
And my grandmother was also in show business, and they met in show business, and her name was Nan Gardner, and she was in Follies in New York City, and then that was after that when they went out on the road with the family. And so my mother and my uncle were pretty much raised on the road traveling around the United States. And my mother, the act, yeah.
That's amazing.
My uncle, yeah, he performed and he played piano, and my mother also was part of the act, danced and sang as a child. So having that background, it's influenced me a lot. And then growing up, we would travel a lot, and that influence of traveling was big on me because as a child, I can remember even from a very early age, seeing distinctions in the land between different places and industrial places or the natural landscapes. And even from that age, I remember being very much enthralled by that, maybe much like a musician would be interested in sound at an early age or something like that. And I was just enamored by it, and I still am. So
Yeah, and you were talking about, you said you found your way into large format photography pretty early, and that's kind of rare. Most people don't kind of get into that until much later. It's like how did that come about? Like, did you have a friend or a family member that was into photography that was like, "Hey, you got to check this out"?
well, I was in high school. I went to City S School, which is a alternative school in New York City. It's based around going out and internships. It's kind of like a different kind of education, and which I really appreciated because as a kid, it was really hard for me to sit in class and follow the normal routines of education. So I was always kind of daydreaming at one of them. So I wanted to be out and taking photographs. I was the same. Yeah. Uh, so I had a mentor in high school who saw what I was doing with my 35 millimeter. I had a a Minolta XTSI, which was like mid entry level 35 millimeter that I use. I still have it over here. And then he said, well, he saw what I was doing. He's like, well, you should try a large format. And so I got into it, and I started using it. I was always very much valued like the detail of things, the resolution, the ability to translate a real place in into an image or a visual idea, a picture.
Yeah, of course.
And from that point on, I mean, obviously I started with it, and it wasn't until my 20s that I really feel like I became like proficient with it, where it kind of disappears into the background and you're not really thinking about how you use the extension of your pursuit. So yeah, I started early, and I think it's really been important to my whole process. But again, like with the camera, the way it renders space, it's important because like even when as a kid, I was very much influenced by like the worldview paintings of like Bruegel and the Northern Renaissance painters, and how they depicted like these landscapes with the various people in them, peasants and children. And the camera, it allows me to kind of represent the world in that way because the way it flattens space. So yeah, it worked. It just clicked with me. I mean, it's still. I mean, as time goes on, it's slowly dwindling away. I think in terms of film choices and the ability to have the film work or process. But I'm gonna stick with it until until I'm hanging on to my last box of film, but I often wonder, like, what's my last sheet of film gonna be of?
Well, there is a resurgence going of this stuff, and I will tell you this: you can come to Paris. We have plenty of places to process and lots of film. So, yeah, it's like the center. It's the mecca of film. It's I used to have to send off a sheet film, in order to have it processed when I was living in the States, and so. But here it's just like there's 10 places, So come, John. I think it's calling you. I'm just kidding, but no, you're a New Yorker. I can hear it in you. So,
The press usually attends the photo book session at Perry Photo Session. You probably attended also.
yeah, we're going this year. So
I mean, the next weekend is the Chicago for Staples and Stitches.
yeah,
I don't know if I can do both, weekends, maybe.
I would love to meet you in person. So yeah, that would be great. Yeah, and
will be there from Zatara Press.
Oh yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, I'm always, I love kind of hearing about, kind of those origins and kind of how you made your way into large format. And did you, after high school, did you get drawn into education, or did you kind of, how did you evolve your practice, and how, I'm curious about that.
I attribute it on one part to my older sister, Lori, who took a big part in educating me and making sure I was aware of, contemporary trends. And she would take me out to museums. She would take me out to concerts that she felt were important to my, growth as an artist or just a human being, basically, because I think everyone needs to be aware of these things. And that kind of developed in me a sensitivity, not only for photography, but also the greater universal arts, which I think they're all connected in several ways. I mean, poetry, music, theater.
Literally had the same conversation yesterday.
Yeah.
Steve and I, yeah, we were literally talking about this exact thing. Yeah,
Right.
it's so true. I totally agree with you.
It all comes from the same place.
I would totally agree with you.
It's just little different variations.
But, absolutely. The way we choose to express ourselves differs. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So it was that upbringing and then my sister, and then also I kind of just fell in love with certain photographers. So it was painting that influenced me, and I was looking at like Winston. He was an early railroad photographer in the 1950s. He photographed the last days of steam railroading in Norfolk and Western Railway. And I was fascinated with his work, and he shot with 4x5 cameras and flash bulbs at night. Phenomenal. And I took from him, because I had been photographing the railroads as one of my first projects. I photographed trains. Because I was going back to my childhood memories. Growing up, we would go to these places in Pennsylvania and see the old steam railroads. And as a teenager, I went back and I was photographing that memory and I was trying to relive that and kind of understand what it was visually that was still in my memory. So I did that, and then I was looking at Winston Link, and his use of space was incredible. Like he didn't photograph just the train; he photographed the environment around the train, but the people, small towns. He'd photograph from the interior of a general merchandise store, and then out the window you'd see the train in this little window outside. So it was he had a very subtle and nuanced approach to photographing not only the railroad but the American landscape. So that was hugely important for me. And then I started looking more at American painters. The American Modernists were huge, like Hopper, Charles Birchfield, George Ault. And what I loved about them was they were painting these industrial landscapes. And it was basically America at the height of its industrial power, when all these factories were humming and everything was built. You didn't have that decline, post-industrial kind of decline of like after the 1960s. So, and they enriched their paintings with all this color and this vibrancy, and shape and form. And I know there's a Charles Sheeler painting of grain elevators, and the way he paints it with all the lines going across it, and it's just like this beautiful abstraction, but at the same time, it's a literal rendering. You understand what he's painting. So that influenced me also, and that's kind of when I really decided to start embracing color as my format with the big camera. So it was those influences, two basic. I didn't ever officially studied photography in a formal setting. Uh, there's a great book by Steve Simmons called "Using the View Camera," which I rely on quite a bit in learning how to use the system and stuff. But it's yeah, I thought about education, but I never really felt like I wanted to take the leap. I just felt like, there was nothing I was seeing that I wanted to sort of emulate in a way. I knew how to do my own thing, and I would develop my own so-called voice. So, yeah, it's just kind of how things flowed, And I was in the city here, and I was surrounded by all this great art and culture. It was like,
you already had your education, yeah. Yeah, well, and not everybody is
I love teaching. So.
yeah, but not everyone is called to that path. I actually quite enjoy when someone kind of cuts their own way, partly due to the fact is you come with there is a very a distinct and recognizable perspective that comes from the academic approach to it. But yet, there is this path of discovery that kind of, I hear that you were on that, where you kind of developed your own unique kind of perspective, and you can kind of see it. And, I was going to ask you a question there in between, which you were influenced by these paintings of the height of the Industrial Revolution, the height of industrial power in America, and these colorful, vibrant cities. Andrew Borowick was someone that was kind of exploring that through these guides of the Rust Belt, these yeah, and I thought that was really, really interesting. And so, but you're looking at these paintings, even probably some photographers, and you're going out there and you're seeing something really different.
Mm-hmm.
Did that affect you? Did that spark an interest? I'm kind of curious because you have a lot of the post-industrial landscape present in your photography, even in the railroads and stuff like that. So I'm curious, what did you notice out there? What drew your attention? Why choose that as your subject?
Well, like I said, it was a blending of the painters where it was their kind of use of color that I was really enamored with. So I wanted to kind of apply that to photography in a way. And in terms of the landscapes themselves, the places I photograph, and it's a blending of how I felt about the places at the time. A lot of how I work, it's very much about feeling and going with my love of something. And then afterwards, my intellect kind of comes in afterwards, like when I'm composing the picture and I'm trying to, set it up so that the picture itself becomes a representation of how I feel about the place. So I'm not always analyzing at the time, like why I'm photographing here. It's kind of like, well, there's something here that's intriguing me, and it's a spark. It's like a sensation of like, that's interesting. And then I kind of pursue that. But so that's kind of how the process of how I work. And then after the fact, when I come back and I'm editing, and then it's like, well, my intellect comes into play. Does this picture really capture how I felt at the time? And then as I'm printing the images, then I kind of start layering the image with my intention when I'm printing it and adjusting color balance and contrast. And I'm trying to match the the output to how I felt at the time. So I mean, it's nothing new. It's like a traditional approach with like, you know, Adams did the same thing when he printed. You know, he was trying to imbue the black and white negative with black and white print with how he felt, about the scene. And this thing was always like he made the analogy where like the negative is like the the negative is the composer's score. The negative is the print as the score is to the composer or the conductor.
Gotcha.
So it's like it can be reinterpreted at different times, as how you feel over the course of your life. Like you revisit a negative and print it a totally different way, as he did. As like with music, I mean, different conductors can interpret different composers various ways. But yeah, I mean, I love, like, in terms of the landscapes themselves, it's just it's a matter of it's kind of like a game. It's just like I go out there, I'm like, what can I find? What how can I be surprised? What arrangement of objects can I discover and put into four sides of a frame and make something that's that's interesting and different. And I do rely a lot on that serendipity and being surprised when I go out to photograph. I don't necessarily have an endpoint in mind. I'll have certain waypoints of locations that I want to photograph. But I'd say 80% of the time, the images I come back with to home here in New York City are places I just kind of discovered, like on a whim as I was going somewhere else. And as I work, it's funny because I go certain days. I'll go like 3 days. If the light is terrible, I'll just go without making anything, and I'll just be present to the moment and not. I'll just be out there looking and experiencing. So I feel also like you don't really have to take the pictures, which is good. It's frustrating to not have good light, obviously, and but I do rely on weather and light quite a bit to shape my experience of being out there photographing. And I've written about this, at length, and it is like photography for me is like it is like an entire bodily experience where all my senses are usually activated, and if the light is good and like you have low clouds and there's like a warm light filtering through the clouds, and it's like a soft cloudy light, and I just become activated in some way, and I start looking and seeing things clearly about in the land when these situations happen. And so it's a blending of different things for sure. But yeah, I mean, I guess I answered your question in the right sense. I want to avoid like, yeah, it's interesting. I study political science, so it's important too that I have an appreciation for these places that I photograph and their history and how important they were.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a big part of it too. I want to preserve these places before they disappear, and I want to preserve it in a way that kind of has my own mark to it.
That's what I'm pointing to. I have done enough of these interviews now to kind of start to realize some things that are going on the larger global landscape. I would call it the global West, the Western landscape of these industrial towns that have shifted away from production, and they seem to be kind of withering away. And these ideas, especially in the Rust Belt, these ideas of opportunity, of wealth, and all these things that seem to be crumbling, not only visually but also ideas. And I was coming from that perspective, and then you kind of talked about your approach, which I really appreciate, which is very intuitive. You're coming from a place of feeling, and I actually really appreciate that. I think that's really, it makes a lot of sense now when I look at your work, because it's it has that imbued into it, and I really appreciate that. And so, like, one of the things that I noticed that you had said was this kind of preserving a place, and this idea of, I remember what you said before, which you were talking about these places that you would travel to with your family, and you were kind of, you had a memory of it, and you kind of were trying to either rediscover or preserve that memory in a way. Do you feel like you're kind of doing that on a larger kind of scale when you go to these other places? Because you are a New York photographer, not taking photos of New York. You're going out. So
Right.
you're being drawn there for a reason, and I'm curious what that is. And you alluded to it a little bit. You kind of have a respect for these places, and when you're taking these images, does that drive a type of research? Are you kind of doing a visual research of yourself, or do you feel like you're doing like a preservation project? What do you feel like you're doing, if you were to reflect on it?
Yeah. Well, I think in the end, I still struggle with that question. I do confront that question quite a bit, in writing or just in my own, thinking process and work. Sometimes I joke and say that, well, I was raised in New York City, so my entire photography career is based on trying to find a home outside of New York. So I'm just going on trying to escape, in a lot of ways. But no, realistically, yeah, I feel like I, I am trying to preserve these places for posterity. Going back, like I said, I had this connection to the United States and the places, and my political science background and history background developed in me an appreciation for the American built environment. So that's why in some ways, why I want to shoot it.
Yeah.
And preserve it. And what better way to do that, with a big film camera? I mean, you get everything you need there to preserve an image of it. But like you said, I mean, it's weird. It's like as time goes on, we're entering what I call an age of uniformity, where everything is kind of the same.
Yep. Yeah.
I was born in 1983, so I witnessed the time and age without all this technology, and I'm very thankful that I did. In a lot of ways, I'm very thankful that I did. But as this age of uniformity is coming along, everything is becoming homogenized and the same. I mean, everything from like suburbia to the, franchised landscape.
Absolutely.
So as this happens, it's like I feel even more of a a drive to go out and find these places that speak not only to the time and place now, but maybe they could have been 20 years ago, or they could, 20 years in the future. So it's kind of like something a little more, without a certain pinpoint, something that I like to find. But yeah, it's huge because every time I go out, I discover something new. Some building might have been demolished, and it reveals another layer under that of, maybe this. I have a picture of some millstones in Maspeth, Queens, that are just stacked on top of each other, and they're just sitting there. And I hadn't really even noticed that until I revisited the location recently. Um, and that's kind of about, it's like, I don't know, I mean, and I see, like, I think of like sculptors who, have a piece of marble and you're slowly chiseling away to find the form under all that. And I kind of feel like I'm that way with like time and space and light. It's kind of like going out, uh, forming the pictures out of that unformed kind of mass. And so, yeah, that's,
I, I think what you're doing is something that is coming up a lot in my conversations. I literally just had this conversation a few weeks ago with an artist. He's going to come out before this episode, and he was talking about the homogenization and how everything kind of looked the same. And he had taken a motorcycle from Florida, the panhandle of Florida, and he decided to do a cross country and he's Australian, and he wanted to do a cross country to California, and he was starting to kind of notice that a lot of these places kind of had the same stores and the same kind of layouts and the same kind of stuff, and it was kind of all the same. And then he started to notice that same pattern, not just in America, but also in Australia and in Asia. And I was just like, and and I will tell you this, I noticed it here, even in France. You have very similar. Granted, they've done a really good job of holding on to their heritage and building. They have building codes in France where you can't change. You know what I mean? But we don't have that same kind of preservation mindset. But even the chateaus, out in the countryside, you can't change the chateau. Yeah, and so, but even with that per se, McDonald's here is they call that McDo, and it's you have McDonald's everywhere. You even have a Five Guys here. You know what I mean? Which is it's just fascinating, and as a expat, I find it difficult to kind of switch and really become immersed in my landscape because of the homogenization of it all and this globalization of it all. It's like everything is kind of painted with a broad brush, and a lot of places are losing their identity. And I feel like in a lot of ways you are like on an Easter egg hunt to find that difference, that maybe a time of old, or even a way for these places kind of still holding on to that identity that they once had, or it's interesting. Would you say you're on a preservation project? I alluded to it in my earlier question. Do you feel like that's kind of what you're doing in a lot of ways? When you look back at all of this, you're going to go, yeah, I did a good job. That this definitely represented. And you had said something about capturing a feeling. Do you think that's the feeling that you have? Like, what? That's a very intuitive, and I'm asking you to put words on something that has no words. What is that feeling? I point to preservation, but it's not a preservation project per se.
Right.
You have a feeling of it. You're like, oh yeah, this is, let's say a city, this is New York, this is Boston, this is Western Pennsylvania. Is that the feeling that you're getting? Talk to me a little bit about what it is that you're doing there. What pulls you, other than the light and the technical aspects of it? You pointed to it with the engines, with the trains, earlier in our conversation. But what else is? Do you know and understand my question here?
Yeah, I understand totally. I mean, I think.
Can you put words to it?
It's like, I mean, why did Edward Hopper, paint the Nighthawks, or why did Stieglitz photograph the ferry? Or I mean, it's hard for me to really explain that in a way. I just kind of feel like the image is kind of like the representation of that. I mean, that's the final. If I start trying to explain like why I took the photograph, I feel like I'm just kind of lying about it in a way.
Like if I try to go in and try to really explain.
Well, you lied about it, so I was, I'm trying to find the keys here, like, because when we look at the work, and I'm doing a great job of kind of previewing what we're about to look at, so at least teasing what we're about to do here. But it's got like I do feel it inherently, and I'm curious if you've done any like work yourself to kind of understand kind of what is causing you to kind of do it and pursue it for an extended period of time. You've been doing this for quite some time, so I'm just curious what that is. If you've had a chance to reflect on that, or maybe even put words to it. And so, yeah.
I have a piece of writing here. Perhaps I can read that might the photograph stands purely as a receptacle of meaning. Photograph should be a clear and honest representation of the natural world. Its print should mirror the reality of the subject so that the imagination is engaged upon viewing the print. On your imaginative forces work, said Shakespeare. So true with the photograph. Be clear with yourself and what your needs are in making art. Allow the subject to speak for itself. Don't muddy it up too much with fanciful editing and the pretense that you can make the world more beautiful than it is. All you can do is rearrange it.
Perfect. I think you just answered my question. I think
it's a rearrangement of reality that shapes my own perspective on the world. And for whatever reason, it's these places call to me. I mean, some people are called, to nature predominantly, or like, music. It's a collection of visions, I guess, in a way.
Yeah,
so that are shaped. But I mean, there is like there is the academic approach where you're photographing places that have a history and have a social geographic aspect, where there's social geographies, academics who write about the built environment and those places, and they kind of extrapolate them in a literary sense and talk about how the landscape reveals certain things about culture and things like that.
For sure.
I mean, that's that's one approach, and I guess in some ways, like a lot of my work, it's a visual representation of that approach. But I try to create images which, at first glance, are seductive enough that it brings the viewer into the picture, and at that point, they can start discovering things if they want to, if they're sensitive to it. And of course, that's essentially a matter of taste and aesthetic, what you value aesthetically. So, yeah. We could go more into it. I don't mind. It's very.
No, I think we will once we look at the work, and I think this is a great opportunity to kind of jump into some images, maybe even look at what it is you prepared. You prepared a document or a PowerPoint, to kind of take us through, which I think we did talk a little bit about your approach, where you're from. We can jump right to images if you want to, but if you want to kind of, because I know you did a graph or like a kind of a visual that kind of talked a little bit about that approach, which we are kind of talking about now. So we can cut right to that and look at that. I am noticing something throughout my work and my research, and just talking to people that is very prevalent. And we're in the height of an election season. And we have, I think by the time that this comes out, the elections will have been completed, at least in the United States. And even here, in Europe, you're starting to see kind of these interesting movements. And there's a lot of people that don't kind of understand these socio-political kind of climate. They have their viewpoints and they don't understand the other side. But I feel like in a lot of ways, I've been talking to photographers that are looking at these post-industrial landscapes. They're looking at the homogenization of the built world. And if we just kind of look at some of this work, you might get clues to why the world is acting the way it is today, especially in the West. And I feel like I'm on to something. I don't know that I'm on to anything just yet, but I feel like I'm starting to go, oh, I get it. And so I think when we look at these, you'll kind of get a feel for what I'm saying here, and you'll even probably even have your own viewpoint on this. But But let's go ahead and cut to some images. But I just wanted to add that because I feel like you, Andrew, even this episode hasn't released yet when I recorded this, but it will be released by the time this one released. Damien Drew and Australia have been kind of looking at it's some really interesting stuff that's kind of going on. So let's go ahead and share your screen, and we'll take a look at what you've prepared, and we'll jump right into your work. I'm excited to look at it. You have some great stuff, and the way you actually prepare it for presentation, book form, and even it's just great stuff. Let's take a look.
Well, I respect what you're doing, so I want to put something together that
I appreciate that. It's become a labor of love. It's this project is. I started out with an initial concern with the image environment, and it's evolved. And so it's been a really, really fun project. I'm glad you're here. So take us through a little bit about what you have here, and we'll kind of go from there.
I'm just a little briefly about my introduction, foundations, what I feel are certain conflicts with contemporary trends and major projects, and plans and closing remarks. So I grew up in New York City. This is a picture of the building which I grew up in, and I still maintain a studio there. My family's lived here since 1958, so quite a long time. And I took this image. Is interesting. When my friend was visiting from South Dakota, Lou Ebledinger, who's a very good photographer in his own right, and we went on a touristy excursion, and he wanted to go to the top of Rockefeller Center, so we went up to the top of the rock to see the skyline. And I'm looking around, and I'm a little jaded because I'm from New York. It's like I've seen enough of New York, really. But I looked to the west, and I'm looking around. I'm like, between the slice of these two office towers is the facade of my home. And it was just, it was an incredible experience seeing that. I mean, just to encompass that one building within the scale of the city was just phenomenal to see. And I just took it like, I had a small camera with me, but I'd love to go back there and rephotograph it. And then I go back to this piece of writing I did as a kid, and I experienced as a child, but I revisited and wrote it as an adult. At 8 years old, I lived with my father in Delaware. We often drove 2 hours back to New York City, where we lived previous and where I eventually ended up again. We left in the early morning in order to beat traffic. After about an hour driving on the New Jersey Turnpike, the sun would begin to rise in the east over the landscape. I often slept most of the trip, but this time I awoke beside Dad in the pickup truck. It was a particularly rich sunrise. As he drove, I looked out from the window and spotted a most intriguing sight. Against the bright sky in the east, a colorful hot air balloon rose up above the landscape, its translucent color illuminated with the rising sun. Focused instead on his drive, Dad seemed to miss the sight. Strangely enough, his missing out only made it more special. Amid the young life I was living was this confidential moment of solitude, wonder, and mystery. Surrender yourself to the moment. I feel like, in a lot of my work, I try to be very much present with whatever it is I'm photographing at the time, and being sensitive to my own internal state of feeling and emotion. Being raised in New York City, I think it has informed my work on many levels. First is kind of the intellectual. I'm surrounded with so much culture and art and different people, and it's really informed, I think, my sensibility to be sensitive to a broad range of topics and subjects. And also being raised in the city has influenced my appreciation of architecture and the built environment. So I think in my work, as I go out into the broader American landscape, I feel like I'm constantly trying to put some kind of structure and form into these places that I bring with me from New York. But at the same time, I'm in the city. I feel like I build up over time a certain level of tension, which results in the escape from New York City, no connection to the movie Escape from New York by John Carpenter. It's pretty amazing film, though. Maybe I can relate to on some level.
Yeah, it is. The street gangs and maybe.
And then I return with the images, so it's this kind of circular evolution that kind of informs my work and making the pictures of the American environment. And this is the diagram that
this is what I'm talking about.
So if you look at the photograph as a thing, it's created, and I pursue it with, feeling, and I rely on my soul and love of the place in order to bring me to what I'm photographing. And also my experience informs that approach as well, such as my background in the city and, my own sensibilities and my own tastes for what to photograph and how to photograph it. And I pursue the photograph with that momentum. And then the photograph, I mean, I think it's an amazing thing. It can yield discovery. It can yield new unforeseen projects. I've discovered over the course of my career that you should not be overly connected with the results of the images you're making. You should just kind of make the work and let your feeling and experience bring you to the places, and just make pictures. And then over time, you will start to discover certain patterns that start to erupt in the work. And then you can go back and kind of rearrange them into something maybe that you feel has more impact. And then there's success, which, when you have an image that you particularly like, it is quite a nice feeling. And failure is crossed out because I don't think there's really any true failures in this whole process. You may get an image that didn't quite work out as you planned, but it opens up the possibility for a new image, because you're not going to waste time on that particular one, editing it and figuring out, do I include it in the book or not? It's just something, it's something empty, and it opens up your mind to another image creation.
I'm curious about one thing in this diagram. When I saw it earlier before we started the show, we talked about feeling, we talked about experience, we talked about love. What do you mean by soul? You included that word, and I think it's a very distinct word. What do you mean by that?
Oh, it's something ineffable. It's the soul of it's the soul that you bring with when you're out there photographing, and you try to find it in the places. It's kind of like what Baudelaire said in his poem. With heart at rest, I climbed the citadel steep height and saw the city as from a tower. Hospitals, brothels, prisons, and such hells where evil comes up softly like a flower. And he's writing about the city of Paris in the 1800s. And then, he ends that amazing poem. It's an incredible thing. So it's that feeling, and it's, I don't know, it's a certain level of, I guess, poetry that you look for.
It's interesting, to kind of have a, I talk to a lot of different people, and some people take a very academic approach. I find myself drawn to people that have that very intuitive approach, where you're kind of listening to yourself. But this is a type of, awareness has a strong connotation these days. I think it's being hijacked by so many people. Oh, I have awareness, have awareness. But you're kind of aware of something, I think, innate to yourself. I think which is fascinating. And I asked that question earlier, and I think I butchered the question. Like asking you about that feeling, I guess I was really asking about that connection. How do you know? How do you know? Is it just
I get, it's weird. It's weird to describe. I can attempt. It's like I go back to that point about being in the city, where it's like an escape. It's kind of a buildup. in a way of emotion and feeling, and then it's kind of like when you find the place, it's like you're kind of like releasing that energy, and you create the photograph because you found whatever it is that you were looking for, what surprised you. Yeah, it's the internal realization of an external creation, in some way.
It's interesting because it initiates a process. It's not like, because large format is a process. It's you have to set up a frame. You literally it's not a 35 millimeter lift up, click, and move on. It's this is it kind of thing. And I think so many people that are doing art or photography, they're chasing that. And it sounds like in some ways in your practice, you have kind of been in alignment with that. And I find that to be exciting. I think that's really cool. And when I find somebody that says that, I have so many questions. I'm like, tell me more. How do you know? When did you find it? Did you ever know you had that? Like, I just have so many questions about that. But it's so unique to the person. You know what I mean? It's so unique to you. It's so hard. And I love the word ineffable because I think that's the exact word. It's like, how do you describe that? You know what I mean? Like,
I know. Yes. But yeah, with the big camera, it's like it's weird because it's like a forced certain handicap where you cannot create images, unlimited. There's a certain limit to what you can produce.
absolutely.
And then when you do expose a frame, it's interesting the way that it impacts my my own being, because it's like, well, I made this image, but it's still latent. It's not there yet. It's not finished. It's still sitting in the film holder in my car. It could get stolen, I mean, God forbid, it gets stolen. It could, it could have been light leaked. I mean, there's so many things that could possibly go wrong with a film capture. And all these, I guess it's my own anxiety that brings it to me, but that enables me to actually produce more work, because I'm constantly in this state of the unexpected and the unresolved. The great thing about film also is the physicality of it. Like, if you look at Adam's work, I mean, this piece of film was there, and 1917 when he photographed Half Dome or something like that in Yosemite, this thing is actually there. It's just like incredible, like, to think of that, the reality of that.
It's like a tiny business.
Digital files will, I mean, to preserve that is a totally different matter. I mean, so, I mean, it's hard. I often resort to writing and poetry to kind of explain like how I feel about certain things, like, my process.
I think it's amazing. I'm a big fan. And so you also kind of, you included this slide here. It says reconciling my work with contemporary trends. And I'm kind of curious a little bit about that. So talk me through a little bit about these points you have here.
Well, like, even from my earliest age of when I was starting out, I was looking at like contemporary photography, and I always felt like I would see something, and I always felt like I had a response to it, in the sense, well, I wanted to do this in a different way that kind of had a dialogue with that work, and maybe captured it in a different voice. And so early on, for the first point, the choice of color, I mentioned earlier that I started to work with color, when I was looking at the painting work of American Modernists, and I have a very naturalistic perspective. I quoted earlier about having the print be a representation of the natural order of things, and So the mirror up to nature is a quote from William Shakespeare's play Hamlet, where Hamlet has a speech to the players, and he speaks to them about a production that they're about to put on for King Claudius, and where Hamlet tries to catch the conscience of the king because obviously he murdered his brother to assume the throne. And Shakespeare goes in and he talks about, speak to speech, pray you, I pronounce it to you trippingly on the tongue. And you have to hold the mirror up to nature and be not too tame, but let your own discretion be the tutor. Suit the action to the word to the action, with this special observance that you overstep not the modesty of nature. This is one part of the longer soliloquy, but in this, I really recommend a lot of artists, people should read this and study this. Not only that part section, but also, the play in general. But in this soliloquy, he talks about not only theater, but also art. And you have to hold the mirror up to nature, but you cannot make it overstated. You have to stay within certain bounds, but then also you have to let your own judiciousness be a kind of a temper within the greater art world and your audience as well. So you have to be quite aware of not only what you're creating, but also the audience that's going to witness it, because certain people obviously will be more analytical and more critical of what you're making than certain other people. So you have to be aware of that. Do not inject external meaning in the photograph. Like I said, I like to kind of have the image speak for itself. If I do write about my work, it's kind of more like I'm speaking about my own personal experience of the place.
I think that's interesting. So many when you talk about external meaning in a photograph, so many people do that.
Yeah.
When you say reconciling my work, this word reconciling it kind of triggers me. I'm curious. Why do you feel like you have to reconcile? And something like this line here kind of stands out to me. Do not inject external meaning into the photograph. When you're in art school, people often over-explain their image. They sit there and explain, well, it comes from, and you're saying don't do that.
Yeah, I know that approach. This kind of approach, I guess, is maybe a little archaic in this time and place. But I feel like a lot of the time, if it's not visible in the image, and you're going to explain it, it doesn't really add up. Does the actor have a little note that explains what he's what he's doing on stage? No, the actor acts the words, and hopefully, if he's good enough, he captures the essence of the playwright on stage. You don't have to have that interpreted to you, what he's saying. And I think photography, and much less so painting, it has this caveat where people need to have things explained to them. And so I guess it comes from the mid-century with the photo magazines and things like that, where you had photojournalism tied in with text and that kind of thing. But
so you
just feel like I try not to explain the image too much. I want to have the picture kind of speak to its own merits.
I think what you're doing is there's an inherent indexical value to photography. There is it is
only about that.
Yeah. And so you're leaning into it, but making it your own. Yeah. And this is,
any art form, I think, has, it's its own specific power, and I think photography truly does have certain elements, like you just mentioned, that it speaks to certain output better than others. You're gonna, but that's okay. Go ahead, Patrick. Sorry.
Well, they also have this, art for art's sake, kind of. Have you heard that before? Don't make art for art's sake, and often, in in the quest to make photography art, we overcomplicate it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and I like that approach.
Read the complications to other
Leave it to other fields. They do it better.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they do it better. I don't know. I had this exact conversation yesterday too. It seems like I was getting prepared to have a conversation with you. So, it's interesting. I love how I've never had anyone come on the show and kind of outline kind of the way they look at their work. It's actually quite refreshing. Yeah. No, but this other point that you had here, well considered but not well felt.
Yeah.
What? But you said you lead with feeling often. So what do you mean?
Yeah.
Well, it kind of goes back. I mean, these are all related in some tangential sense. So I mean, I'll see work where it's like the photographer, maybe he's like, there's something in it where he's trying to explain what's happening in the image, but in the same sense, it's not he has not taken the image far enough where the actual visual appeal is enough where it brings the viewer in to actually find that himself. I don't know, analogy is probably like go back to acting where you have the text of the image, the text of the play, and the actor is there to enact that and make the writing a reality for the audience. So like with photography, it's like I'm very deliberate and very careful about like when I stop to make a picture. I usually probably say, no, I'm not going to photograph that most of the time. Part of that is clearly like the camera choice. Part of that is my own, how I pursue the process through the world. But it's like, how far are you taking the picture? How much work are you putting into creating what's involved in the frame? And you look at my work; they tend to be very, I think, sort of very dense, very, there's usually quite a bit of things going on in the frame. So I put personally, it's my own approach. I put a lot of effort into the singular frame when I make the image, and then in acting, when I print it, it's like how much am I putting into it in the printing aspect to how to make that image a reality, and a beautiful object. And so sorry, it's gay. Well, that's essentially kind of what I mean about that, but it does relate to the other points as well.
Well, they all kind of even it says too far removed from the earthly stance. It kind of points to that initial quote they are talking about the
an asked me, drone photography, and it's just like personally, I feel like I don't want to see the world from like a God's view. I want to see the world from like the view of a person. That's my own perspective. So I feel like it's important to be on that level. Though I considered maybe using a drone, but maybe lower level, like different, like it could be like on the hilltop.
Yeah, or more directly above, like a bridge view, Yeah. I agree with you. It's kind of, I've seen a few people do drone photography, right? And it's and it's when it's used in a in context with other things, just primarily, so many people try to impress me with their drone photos or drone videos, and I'm like, cool. No offense to anyone out there. I love it, but
I mean, for me personally, it's like the part of photography is like the analytical aspect,
Yeah.
When once you set it up, it's like, how do you compose it? How are you laying up the elements within the frame? And like an elevated view it tends to just include a lot, and it's not specific enough for me sometimes.
Yeah, it almost gets so elevated to abstraction. You almost lose it. It becomes color fields, and it can be What is that? Or Harmonious Bosch? I'm saying it wrong.
Piranha's Bosch,
Yeah. It reminds me of one of those kinds of really big.
the Tower of Babel.
Yeah, you have all that stuff going on. You just sit there for hours just looking at all the different scenes.
I love his work too.
Is Herminius? Did I say it wrong? Herminius Bosch?
Hieronymus Bosch.
Hieronymus Bosch. I apologize to everyone out there. I do know what I'm talking about.
I mean, the works are just so intricate, bizarre, and
Yeah.
there's the like little demons, like man, it's just amazing stuff. And I love that as a kid.
I did too. It reminds me of Where's Waldo, those books. Yeah, you're just kind of chasing, and he has little scenes in those too, you know. And it was almost more fun just to kind of not find Waldo until you did. And that, I think that was the beauty of those books. But I think that's really interesting. And so you're going to take us into some work now, correct?
Yeah, I'll just yeah.
So talk us through a little bit about some of those projects you selected, and let's jump in.
So these are 6 main projects that I've created on the American land, American environment. The first one here is National Character, which takes a view of the American landscape through various environments. So it's kind of akin to the traditional works of maybe Joel Sternfeld or Walker Evans, where they go out and they're trying to capture these places.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I like how all the details that you're able to add in. That last image was great. All that yellow, and how it just kind of all carries everything through. You have a lot of contrast here, which is contrast in ideas, and yeah, I think it's interesting.
Well, I tend to print. Yeah, I tend to print quite dense. I like dark, dense color generally for what I do. But this is a Scottish Rite building in Wheeling, West Virginia. And like I was speaking about before, how this building in front was demolished, and then it reveals this further layer of structure, which, it really illuminates the environment.
It's amazing.
Field of tractors.
Yeah,
this is an array of tractors in various forms of repair and disrepair in North Carolina.
So when you think about this series, what was drawing you out here? What was I know we talked a little bit about your process, your inspiration, and all of that stuff, but you group these particular images together for a reason. Talk to me a little bit about the grouping, maybe the project statement per se, and I guess is yeah. Give me a little bit of that context.
I have a piece of writing here that I could read.
Sure, why not?
Growing up in the American landscape is one way to do it. Here, we got it all. Rusted out scrap yards, equally rusted out, but significantly larger buildings, lots of roads to drive on. If you ever wanted to visit a rusted out factory or scenic mountain range, yeah, we had those too. I grew up here looking at rusted places and beautiful landscapes. I like to think of myself as pretty smart in my youth. I could feel the difference between both early on. I'm a photographer now. These rusty places, and pretty ones too, still stir something inside me. I don't know what it is, but I know that's why I'm an artist. But yeah, it's also a visual record of these places that I really, I felt fascinated by. And I aimed for a certain level of, how should you say it? Just a certain irony, a certain skepticism of an ambition where you have this cinder block mansion that was built in the Florida Keys to withstand tropical storms, and it's clearly been abandoned. So it's a certain level of ambition, I think, that's in these works where uh, you see like what Americans value and where we've kind of fallen short, or perhaps where we've succeeded.
It's interesting.
This was 4 boys that I photographed in Egmont Key, Florida, which is a little island off of Tampa. So I packed all my 8x10 camera equipment, and I took a little boat, a 15-minute boat ride from the shore to this little island. I hiked around the island for pretty much the whole day and just photographed. And I love this image because it speaks so much to my own youth and childhood, like being out in these environments with my dad and exploring and really laying the foundations from my memory of being within the American environment. And then the Mercer Mall and church, Bluefield. So this is one of the pictures where it's like I was quite stunned by it, because I like it captures in kind of like a circular elliptical narrative all of the things that are central to the American experience in this time and place. You have the church, you have the mall, and you have the house residence in the front. And it's kind of like this thing that I really pursue is like, what's in the frame? Can it speak to multiple themes in of itself? And then very small bottom on the larger print, you can see 2 mailboxes that are kind of framed within another empty sign. And it's kind of like a picture within a picture. So when you're viewing, I have a large print of this above my desk. You kind of start to discover certain things within the picture when you make larger prints, which I think is quite valuable, depending on what your own purpose is. And then Stoney in Robertsdale, Alabama. He was an old A&W root beer mascot. Yeah. Branded. But I composed this in a way to show all these other street furniture elements in the power lines, the highway sign and street sign, and show the quite it's a little unexpected arrangement and a little bit eccentric, which I think when you go out into the American environment, it's a very eccentric place, and you really find these interesting juxtapositions.
Yeah.
The next project that's ongoing is the railroad landscapes. The American Railroad, the landscape itself surrounding the rails is quite an interesting thing, because it is, from what I have learned, the last place that really undergoes any major shifts in terms of new construction or suburbanization. So if you go along the railways, you see these places that have pretty much been unchanged for decades, maybe. So I'm going out and I'm looking at this cross section of the places that line the rails. And I spoke earlier about trains. The first project was photographing the trains, but I soon realized that photographing the trains was problematic because, first of all, it kind of places you too much within a category of photographer or artist. And secondly, by leaving the train out, I could make pictures which spoke to not only my present time, but also perhaps could speak to an earlier or later time. So they sort of became not fixed to one point in time. And if I included a train or other object, it might make a representation or a anecdote that would signify, the relation of the picture to the present day, which I wanted to avoid because I wanted to photograph the railroad landscape as something that is sort of timeless and has become, over the course of our entire history, a very important avenue for exploration.
I like how you
Yeah.
Yeah, I like how you put it. The rail in the foreground, and that last image is quite good. I really love that last one. It's almost like green pastures with these almost foreign. Yeah, it's like a foreign object, The railroad becomes like a foreign object. It's like, what is this doing here?
The thing amazing about it is that, like, I realized I started using the rails as kind of a gestural object, where the rails each picture, and if you follow the line, and it's kind of becomes this great connector of all the different places. I mean, this one is it's one of those things where the pictures where I just kind of like my senses went haywire because it's layered in so many ways that that's really something that I value in a photograph, having these layers, sort of complex elements that kind of come together.
It's kind of your signature in this particular series. I noticed it almost instantly, and it almost feels like you're taking us on as a passenger on these railroads, and seeing where it takes us. Yeah. I got that feeling almost immediately. Yeah, I got the feel, and also the perspective, because you're sitting up and above it. So like you are, you're giving us that elevated view that a train would have, but you're including the rail in it, which is the railroad in it, which is interesting as well. It's as you can, but so much of the railroads in the United States are, it's all about moving raw materials. It's not necessarily passenger, and so we don't have a culture around it. It's almost because it is very much. It's not viewed as a transportation option, and it's just used for industry. A lot of people look at it as a nuisance. It's like, another one of these again, Yeah. So
On my back.
Are you playing with that? That perspective on the railroad?
I want to show people, and that was part of my beginnings with the project, was I wanted to share these places. I wanted people to see, how the rails have connected people and how they transformed the landscape and created really like the ability to build and to live in certain areas of the United States. They serve, at the height of the rails in the 1930, 1925, it was something over 275,000. Don't quote me on that, railroad trackage. And now it's less than half that. So yeah, it's that's definitely, I do try to relate to that aspect and try to show people how that how the rails of are existing as a very important part of the environment. But I wrote this thing about rivers and railroad tracks. Railroad tracks and rivers have something in common. Each one is difficult to pass by without taking a glimpse down their stretch. For one, it's to look out for an approaching train, and for the other, to witness its natural beauty, to bring us a little closer to the elemental things in life. But I have seen rails which in certain light are equally beautiful, for like rivers, they seem to stretch on, beckoning us to the horizon. Anything we see which stops us in our tracks, as to ruminate on, is as natural an element as a river or tree in my book. So, kind of see the rails as an extension of a natural kind of element. Yeah.
Yeah, it's,
So,
and I was talking to another artist. It's a previous episode. I think it's 43. Those were the railroads, the rivers. They used to carry all the materials and stuff. And so that's how a lot of cities and stuff were built. And we just took those rivers up top on landway once we developed the locomotive. And it's a fascinating part of our history. It's funny, in Europe they lean into it. It's fully developed. The modernization of the railroad here is amazing, and just to even think that America sees a future without them, when you have societies even in Asia and here that really lean on them. It's a vital part of the future for it. And so it seems like it's a strange, complex relationship to the American landscape and the American way of life. So I'm kind of curious about it. And I love this series because you give us a kind of a glimpse into it. But you're also, when we talk about post-industrial landscapes, it's like the railway in a sense is a part of that fading idea of America. And so the images that you're able to capture here are beckoning to of a time that has passed. And you're seeing not only kind of those, you're witnessing a little bit of that, but also kind of the changing idea about these spaces, these towns, and these railways. It's fascinating. When you get back and you look at these images, does it cause you to reflect on some of those things? Do you just go, why are we doing this? Or are you kind of more visually stimulated, or like, talk to me a little bit. Does it make you ask these like deep existential questions about who are we and why are we doing this? I'm sure it does. You wrote a little bit about it, but
no, it does. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've read, I write quite a bit about, like, how it's influenced us. And, I think of like, the places that are disappearing. And then I think of like all the artists that were influenced by, the places that, what's going to influence us in like 20 years, I mean, I go back to, you think about the early photographers, William H. Rao, Carlton Watkins, who, they photographed the railroad at its, earliest years, in the 1800s. And like, I mean, these places are a source of imagination and a source of creation for people.
Yeah.
And so I think often about that. And, sure. I mean, I'm constantly in a state of reflection on it as well.
Yeah.
Also, it's an imaginative thing. It's like, if you want to enter the picture, I try to make something where it's like it triggers something, and you're like, this one. I often do like several pairings and contrasting relationships with the different pictures. And so you have two separate elements. One's a saloon in Upper Peninsula, northern Michigan, and the image on the top is a transfer table in Livingston, Montana, where they would have along the rails in the mid-ground, you'd have a large table that you place a locomotive on, and it would shift it down, and then it would enter the doorways in order to be repaired or serviced. So instead of having a roundhouse, you had like a large warehouse, basically, with the transfer that would bring the trains into each slot. And again, just like the repetition of the doorways against the tracks was something that interested me. So I relate to that quite a bit.
That's amazing.
And then again, like just the serendipity of this old factory in Cleveland, Ohio, and someone wrote up above it 2 trains, which was just a perfect kind of note to the project in general.
It's like, thank you.
Right.
Yeah. No, it's
Another pairing.
yeah. Yeah, and you're shooting large format, so I'm sure it's 4x5, like usually like this. Are you cropping them and making these panoramic kind of things, or
They're primarily shot with one frame on the 8x10 with a split dark side. So
are you doing 8x10?
yeah, primarily 8x10 now.
That's great. No wonder you're worried about film disappearing.
A little video of setting up that shot of a hyper.
Oh, there you go.
So I often have a 12-foot tripod that I use in order to gain certain perspectives, like over the tracks.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's great. I asked the 8x10 question right away. That's do people stop and ask you, or I'm sure they're like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
It's probably a fascinating thing for them, especially in these small towns where you're going. You're going out there, so
It does open up a lot of doors. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet it does. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
This was in Sayre, Oklahoma. I knew this location I wanted to photograph, and then I arrived there, and the building was entirely backlit, which I wouldn't normally photograph, but because of the luminosity of the structure itself and that rich, like, red color of the elevator was actually I was able to capture it, and I was able to print it in such a way where it really shines. I think for the project, and the shadow itself kind of created a little slice of light that's emanating into the left part of the frame, which, interesting enough, kind of mirrors the gesture of the tracks.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that relationship that I often look for.
Yeah, it's a great one. I think you balanced it nicely. Yeah, it could have easily been blown out. So nice job. Yeah, nice job getting that shadows, the details in the shadow. It's and it reminds me of what you were that last image. But go ahead.
This is set up to photograph the previous image on the flood wall. It was about a 1.5 foot wide flood wall that I had to set up my camera on top of. And I had the front leg was resting against the wall itself, and the two wider tripod legs were actually on this metal ladder that was suspended over the wall so you could actually enter the track. So I was like 12 feet high up taking this image.
Wow.
And this is interesting in terms of the dividing line between the railroad and the river. Ohio River is part of the right, so this flood wall is protecting against the rising water levels of the factory on the left.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You are really, you talk about being very active with your body and out there, and I think those videos kind of encompass you found it like important to kind of show those videos kind of giving us a little insight into how you set up and go. Why did you feel that?
You have physicality to it, which I think is important.
Why do you think that's so important?
Because you're working, you're moving around, you're getting endorphins that affects your mood. You become excited and happy with, whatever it is you're doing, maybe, or frustrated, so it's like that physicality is really important. I often take the camera and go hike for a mile or two with it and looking for like a possible picture.
It's great.
Yeah. This is the last slide of the project.
It's
This was in Rodell, West Virginia, and one of those discoveries that I was quite amazed by. Like, I had traveled so much over this country, but I never quite found a church that had 6 flights of stairs to reach its entranceway. It's interesting.
You're going up to meet God as well.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
that's
yeah. You got to get on his level up there. Yeah. That's
you're sensitive to the images, then you start to see that kind of relationship. Glad you noticed that.
yeah. It's funny. It's there are certain elements that are in almost every American town. There's a church and some kind of huge shopping center nowadays. This is the homogenization that you're talking about. Usually Walmart. Yeah.
Right,
You find Walmarts and churches. That's what you find. And that previous image that you were kind of talking about. And even I'm sure there's a railroad that witnesses this. So, so you did something with this series. So this became a show itself. And I think this is a video of the prints. So talk me through your approach to a show. How do you envision these as prints? And so talk to me a little bit about that as we see the video here.
This was an exhibition in Barcelona that I put together with a photography festival. And when I sequenced the pictures, I'm just kind of feeling my way into how each one relates, like in terms of the frame, like where the tracks line up in the frame relating to the next image. So I truly think like this body of work, more than any of my other projects, it really comes together like when you see them together, because it does have sort of like a typological kind of feeling to it in that way, where the tracks sort of become a object in themselves because they reappear through the project and in different relations. So yeah, that's basically my attempt with that. In terms of when I hang the show, is the gesture of the tracks really comes to the forefront in terms of how to design it.
It's awesome.
More so than like the actual, like what the image represents in terms of the environment surrounding the tracks. And then we can move on to, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Zatara Press, which was founded by Andrew Fednack in 2014. And I've collaborated with them for 3 books that we've done. And they're, like it says here, he started to give voice to a variety of projects through the medium of unique artist-style photo books. So each project that Zatara Press produces is a collaboration with the artist. So you'll bring images to him or an idea, and then you work with Andrew exclusively in order to give a unique voice to that project. So when I come to him, Carbon County, I wanted to publish, which we'll discuss in a minute, pictures of the American West. I came to him with these images and I really wanted to do a book. I kind of hounded him for a couple years, and I was like sending him Instagram posts and things like that. And he was following along, and then we sat down and we're like, well, we're going to make a book, or we're going to make a folio. And we kind of weighed the different options, and we opted towards making this folio box, called Carbon County, because it kind of mirrors back to the traditional folios of Ansel Adams and Edward Weston. So it's a clamshell folio box that we produced. So. And each of them became, through this collaborative process, it became this wonderful art object, limited edition. It was quite successful.
That's great. Carbon County, like, yeah. Where did the name come from?
So Carbon County is a place in southeast Wyoming, sort of near Laramie. The county seat is a town called Rawlins, which was along the old Transcontinental Railroad, which connected in 1869, obviously resulted in the connection of east and west at Promontory Summit in Utah. But the railroad in the late 1860s was being constructed across Carbon County. And that's why got this name because of the coal deposits that were discovered in Carbon County, and they were all mined up along the range where the railroad ran by. And so the coal was mined in order to fuel the early steam locomotives. And the Carbon County project, I was there and I began photographing the people and the places there. And one of the themes that developed was the cowboy. So he kind of reappears throughout the project in various forms. One version was the noble cowboy, another is kind of the cowboy as the executive, which is seen in the book. And also here's the cowboy as kind of the traditional working cowboy. This picture of a cowboy driving cattle near the ranch in Wyoming where I was working. So I was working at a ranch at the time as a photographer, which allowed me the access to spend time there and photograph Carbon County over the course of 8 months, which was extremely important to creating this body of work on the level of having the amount of images that you need to edit down to a book. This is the booklet, which is available. I have several copies available through my studio. Though it's sold out at the publisher, you can still get one if you contact me. So this was a booklet version of the Carbon County folio box. So more of like an affordable version of the images that are seen in a booklet form. So it's it's a newsprint, large format print.
So you just let's jump back into that. So you went out there to work on a ranch. Yeah. What pulled you out there? Did you just go, I have this idea, and you just looked for, like, talk to me a little bit about that, because these are great. This reminds me of where I grew up. I know it's
really?
Yeah, I'm from Texas, so like,
right.
People think of cowboys in one particular way, but yeah, I think you did a nice job of capturing kind of what they are, what the current version or the current state of Cowboy 2024, or what year was this done in?
We published this in 2019 with the 2017, yeah.
Yeah, so you have you kind of it's recalling kind of my my upbringing in some ways. So it's really interesting. So talk to me, how did you get out there, and what kind of spurred this project?
Well, I know, I grew up in the Northeast in New York, and as a kid, you grow up in the United States, and, my father would always be watching Westerns, and, John Wayne was like an idol. And so I always had in my mind the idea of the American West. Like, what is it? It always seemed like a place that was exciting, and there was adventure there, and there was, endless opportunity, and all these bountiful things that, are wrapped up in what we call the American dream, so to speak, for better or for worse. I mean, so around 2015, I had photographed the Midwest and the Northeast, and I wanted to go out west. So I got an artist residency at the ranch, and that enabled me to photograph. So it was the railroad which really brought me there. I wanted to photograph more of the railroad landscape, but following that trackage and following those arteries across the United States led me, to this Carbon County project. So then I returned 2 years later as the official photographer, and that's when I created a large part of the photographs that encompass the book.
That's great.
Basically. And then when I got there, started working, and I started spending time with people and meeting and learning about different locations. But yeah, I really wanted to capture kind of like the cowboy element currently, but also like kind of like the traditional spheres of what the West embodies.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was confronted with that suspicion that the American West is not quite all what it's wrapped up to be, and that I was ingesting as a child. And obviously that's changed over the years, but of course Cormac McCarthy's writings and certain films. It's really modified. The view of the West is like this ideal place.
Sure, they play it up a little bit, but most of the time, cowboys are in baseball caps and jeans.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that image that you had of the guy on the horse through the window, I want that. Yeah, but
I'll send you a print, sure.
Oh, what a guy! No, that right there, that's Texas. That's yeah. That's when you get out into the countryside and you get to know some of these guys. They ride out there in cars, and yes, you do some horse riding, but it's amazing. Did you ride a horse while you were out there?
I did, yeah. I did it once or twice.
How'd you do?
Yeah.
How'd you do?
Not so good. You look.
I don't. It's Western style is a different. It's a different thing. So cool is that? Yeah, that's. They have the horn for.
I ride a bike around New York City.
They have horses out there too, don't they? Don't they do horses through the street sometimes? The cops?
Yeah,
the police.
Yeah.
I thought so. Paris does it too. I was shocked when I heard a horse. I was like, "What is going on?" I'm like, "I'm not in Texas anymore. What's happening?" And then I looked out there, and then they are. Just the most beautiful horses. That's unbelievable.
They have the horse and buggies too. Right around.
Oh, they do. Oh, yeah, by the park there, Central Park, right? They do that. Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. I saw a project that they followed the stables in city centers and how they used to and how they closed them and how they were working. I thought that was a really fascinating project. But so take us through what else you have here. I think we just have a few more minutes left, but
just briefly, yeah. This is the Grove, so this is a follow-up to the Carbon County project with Zatara Press that I published. So it's a collection of my poetry and images, which is available now.
I love that. I love the connection between writing and images for you. I think that's really interesting. I was talking to another gentleman. He doesn't see a series. He looks at one image and that's it. He doesn't have a series per se. And I often looked at him and I said, you're not writing stories. You're not telling us a film, through a series of image. You're writing short poems. Right there. And I was like, have you ever done poems with that? And I see you doing that with that other body of work. That's cool.
The Locomotive project is a addition to the Railroad project where I'm going back and I'm making a type study of these various streamlined locomotives from the latter half of the 20th century. And they all usually carry markings of old railroads that once crisscrossed the United States. So it's a historical reference in terms of how diverse and eclectic the American environment was at the time in terms of various corporations and how the railroad connected these places together. And a lot of the railroads embodied their advertising with certain mentions of American history, like the Milwaukee Railroad had a train called the Hiawatha, which of course is a Native American legend and a epic poem by Longfellow. So it's interesting, like these railroads, how they really embodied the places that they served, and I try to capture that in this project. And Highway Arbor is another project that's an ongoing project. Study of trees that line the various byways and highways of the United States. And all of this is obviously visible in the website. The ferry is a very sort of an unusual project for me. I photographed it as I was returning from Wyoming. I had a very visceral, intense reaction to the cultural splash that hit me as I returned to New York, and I was commuting on the Staten Island Ferry. So I began chronicling my time making this commuter journey across New York Bay. So I started meeting people and capturing their experience of taking this journey on the boat across the bay, and how they sometimes abandon themselves to the experience of the weather and light. And here's a guy in the center who's taking a selfie of him with the New York skyline in the background. There's a man sleeping there in the center also. And this is a project that's very much a pre-pandemic project. After the pandemic, I stopped photographing it for one reason was the fact that we no longer had to go to Staten Island anymore, so I didn't take the trip anymore. But also after the pandemic, I think a lot of the mood shifted on the ferry. It became a little more distant to me for some reason. So,
do you think is that still an ongoing one for you, or no? Are you going to do it again?
I haven't photographed it in a few years.
Yeah, it might be done.
I'd like to. Maybe there's a few pictures I'd go back and try to get, but I've been envisioning lately a book project relating this.
Yeah.
Where you kind of have gatefolds, and it's like you're revealing as you turn the page. You kind of reveal like this hidden part of the ferry, and so maybe, I might maybe work towards that.
Yeah, you have. Are you still doing? Were you doing large format on that one too?
No, that was all small format.
Okay.
Like I was shooting commercially in Wyoming for the ranch, so I was also using a digital small format camera. So.
No.
No, I'm no stickler. Like I'm not anti-digital or anything. I just feel like the format is chosen depending on
What you're doing,
what you're trying to achieve. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. There's some people that just purely identify with the camera that they have, and it's almost like an extension or an arm or something. But it seems like the medium is driving you, and which is
I just
perfect.
Wanted to get shout out to the Kentucky Documentary Photo Project, which commissioned me to photograph Kentucky in 2022. So I spent a month there photographing in April.
Yeah.
Great project where they're trying to revisit the photographs that were made in the 1930s and the 1970s and making a contemporary rendition of those images by hiring various photographers. They're working today, from photojournalists to like fine art photographers.
It's amazing.
And this is just very quickly a new assembly of images that I've been playing around with in terms of I'm kind of finding myself looking closer in at sort of the mid-ground, because I've captured a lot of these farther away views, and I'm like, as I said, I'm trying to like hammer away at the American landscape and trying to find truth. And I'm finding these mid-ground places that are very illustrative of the America kind of in mid-century, and I see in a lot of them there's a lot of underpinnings of geometric elements, shapes. This is a metal teepee that I discovered in Kentucky. It's kind of like the trilon in the hemisphere from the World's Fair. I kind of related to that in some way. So I kind of found myself playing with shapes and form. But these are all very new images, and I really haven't really done much with them yet, but I just wanted to share them and just to show witness to, like, what I'm currently kind of exploring and what's triggering.
Yeah, you have the same. I can see you evolving. You're there is a. It's with you. It's really nice to see. You have the same sensibility, the same care, the same thing, but you're also like, and this is what I like about the intuitive nature by which you approach this medium is you're kind of allowing it to change you. Would you agree with that? You're allowing the medium and your question to kind of allow your.
That's an amazing point. Yeah,
So
I do feel that in a lot of respects. How, yeah, I definitely have, where the environments kind of impact me in a lot of ways. I'm just kind of open to that experience.
yeah, well, when you go that direction, you kind of see a clear evolution, and I want to encourage you keep going because these last images are awesome.
I found this one was like, I don't even know what it was, but it's like this massive orb that I discovered. There was like 2 of them
Yeah.
in Kentucky. They were sitting in the back of sort of a warehouse, a garage, and I went back there and I spent like a few hours just taking their picture. I don't know. I feel like in some of these pictures, they could be like these sculptures that were made and just relegated into, the elements and left to just collect this residue of the elements and history. And like the earlier picture of that iron triangle, I mean, that could be like, a James Turrell sculpture, light installation or something like that. You know what I mean? I know that's what I'm not working. I see these connections and stuff. So.
Well, it's like even those millstones you had mentioned earlier, those the stack of millstones, we're leaving these artifacts of the industrial like these little things, they're just kind of being left strewed about like relics of a forgotten time, and yeah, it's just interesting. I like it. I really like how you're kind of going out and then now in, and I also like that you're not purely identified with a certain process. The medium is more important. Your investigation is more important. I think that is really interesting.
What's that? Is the me?
Yeah. Well, let's we can stop sharing now, which and
Oh, sure.
yeah, and with that, like, what finish that point. The medium is the message. Finish that point, and that'll be my final question for you.
Yeah. Photography itself is, has its strengths and its weaknesses, and I try to stay true to that. The reality of the picture and the moment. I want to really represent reality as I find it. Stay true to that. And yeah.
In all of you've been traveling the United States, and I was reading this these articles, and I forget the author right now, but they were talking about this idea of flyover country, and there's a lot of people.
I think that's Lewis. I think that's Lou Abledinger as a
Yeah. Oh, there's a
flyover country.
Yeah, and there's a collection of essays that this particular person was writing, and that name might be kind of a larger thought that a lot of people are kind of noticing, and you're spending a lot of time in what people consider, it's not the coastal cities and the big city centers per se. You actually live in the middle of one, but you're choosing to kind of photograph flyover country in a lot of ways. And I guess my question, and I guess I don't have a final question. That wasn't my final question. Is there, in all of that time, as a New Yorker yourself, was there anything in this time, in this, I think you're doing kind of research in your own way. Is there anything that you discovered in all of this that makes you pause? Any aha moment that you've had in all of these years photographing and looking at railways, and you went out to a ranch and
Yeah.
Anything in then Kentucky, like anything that just kind of you were like, a discovery, something that surprised you.
Yeah. Oh boy. I think in a large sense, it's basically the idea that the places are always being transformed. There's nothing that's it's truly static. Um, uh, and I've realized that the photograph itself over time has become a moment, and what we all, I think, hope to do when we create these images is find a moment that is embedded with so much meaning. May it be historical, it may be social meaning, it may be academic meaning, feeling, form, shape, and you want to find these moments and you want to be able to expand them so that that singular image, that moment becomes expanded, it can be relived. And as I'm out photographing, and I think that's one of the aha moments that I think I've realized over time is to be sensitive to that. And the fact that these places, are always in a state of being changed into another thing, either by the light or the weather. And from one day to the next, I mean, a place could look different depending on what the situation is in terms of what you're given by the world, And when I go out and I'm like you mentioned before, it's like depending on how you work, like I'm very sensitive to what's happening before. I mean, I kind of let those things like influence my work more than like I'm putting myself into it. It's really an interaction between the environment and myself when I'm out working, and I try not to put too much into the picture. I let the environment wash over me and kind of influence how I make the work. And then obviously all the themes develop, and you start to become interested in different aspects. Like the last pictures that I showed you were these like mid-ground pictures, and I'm just kind of letting the waves like take me. It's kind of like I'm surfing, and like I'm just kind of like a subject of nature and light and weather, and what's given to me by society clearly is this is my subject. Like, this is what's been given to me. This is where I was born. This was how I was raised. So what else can I work with? I could go somewhere else. I could go to another country. Perhaps I've thought about doing railroads all across the world, maybe. But, I don't know if I'll be connected as much there. It might just be like kind of a surface. It might just be a surface view of it, which is fine. But it's like, I really need to be, connected to the place to understand it.
I was thinking about that change element that you're talking about, and something that's been really kind of there's one conversation that haunts me, and it's an episode that you had watched with Andrew Borowick, and he shows two images of a Rust Belt town, and it's an alleyway, and they're separated by 40 years, right? And
right.
And not much has changed, and but you're talking about this element that it does, and
I wouldn't. It would be very hard for me to do that. Like if I made a photograph somewhere, I really wouldn't go back and rephotograph it.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, because I think that would remove the previous image from the importance of the larger sphere of work, because I feel like there's one statement of a place. I feel that's how I feel.
Yeah,
it's kind of wrapped up,
Yeah, well, you're shooting those feelings that you have.
Right.
And you're going to be different. It's just like reading a book for, when you're 20 versus when you're 40. It's going to be a different book. You know what I mean? Yeah. I totally understand that. I totally understand that. But I guess where I was going with that was that you also have this other thing that happens, which is there was this person that was giving me advice. Another photographer was giving me advice because I always ask at the end of each episode, and he was just saying, just take an image. Doesn't matter. Just take it. Every image that you take is going to mean something eventually, because that moment is going to always exist in that moment that you were there. And even at that moment, it might mean nothing, but 10 years from now, it's going to mean something, because you captured something that's in constant change and constant flux. And you were pointing to that, that aspect of it. That's that inherent indexical nature that photography has, and we play with as artists. Actually,
I think it's strong suit.
Yeah, and I think you were pointing to that a little bit, and I love it. I think you're doing some really cool stuff, and I'm so glad to have you on. I just have one final question for you, and we'll wrap up the show here. And which is of course, a lot of people that follow the show are image makers themselves. And so, do you have any advice for anybody out there that is a photographer and or an image maker, or somebody that's kind of pursuing this as their hobby and or passion and or job and or life? Any tales from the road? Any tips?
It's a little humorous, but as in the words of my once acting teacher, Wen Hanman, in response to his being questioned about whether someone should be an actor, he would say, "If you can do anything else, do it. But if you have to act." So
That's good.
compelled to do photography, you got to do it. Just
Yeah.
you got to do it, and don't get caught up in photography. Enlarge your perspective. Read the greats of literature, listen to great music, surround yourself with these other influences, because creativity, like we spoke about previously, is it's all related on certain level. It all comes from the same place. And so you need these other sources of influence in order to shape your vision. And it's very important to be literate, not only in the medium, but also literate in terms of the greater sphere of the art world, and historical as well as contemporary. It's very important to understand what greatness is going before you, because certain level you're going to realize you're never going to create anything as great as like Hamlet or any Shakespeare play. So it's very humbling. And it's very important to be humble in I think the work we make. And so yeah, that's basically my advice. If anyone wants more information or any coaching or guidance, they're welcome to contact me.
That's awesome. I think that's a really I don't know that I've heard that before. I don't I hear a lot of the same advice, but I think our conversation naturally led us to that realization. So I really appreciate having you on today. So thank you so much for coming on. It's a
real pleasure. I'm very excited about what you're doing, and I'm very happy to be here and have the opportunity to speak, because we all need a voice in this world and what we do. So I'll stay here for that. Thank you for that theater presenting.
Of course. This is the moment where you can tell people how they can connect with you and do all that. So I think it's your website is your name hyphen Sanderson, but Sanderson with an E. And then you have an Instagram as well, I think too, as well. So how can people connect with you, and tell us how?
JOHN hyphen Sanderson, SANDERSON.com. You can go to my website. You can check out my Instagram, which is linked on my website. You can go to ZataraPress.com and check out some of the books that we sell there. And I offer all my work I print all my work here in my studio in Midtown Manhattan. So if you're interested in anything, just get in touch.
That's great.
I'll be out there in the Rust Belt landscape. So hopefully I'll run into you.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I have too many reasons to come out and see, but I don't know. I'm starting to get to know. What's that? I have a few people out there now. I might come and say hello. So, once again, thank you for coming and being on the show. I think you had such a interesting perspective, especially to the work we're doing here on this podcast. So, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you to everyone.
Of course. And to all those that have made it this far, thank you so much for joining us on the Urbanaut Podcast. If you like content like this, please like, share, and comment down below. That all helps support this channel and get us in front of more people to check out cool artists like this today. So thank you for coming on and checking us out today. And if you feel compelled to support us in a little deeper way, you can also be a part of our Patreon page. So you can join us there, become a paid subscriber. We are still kind of thinking about cool ways to enhance that membership there. So if you decide you want to support us that way, you can. Patreon.com, the Urbanaut Podcast. And also, if you don't want to be a Patreon member there, I think we also have a way to support us on Spotify as well. So you can become a supporter there as well. And as always, we'll see you next time.